RoseN'Hook Publishing presents Yuletide of the Undead. By Corey Rose. It was a cold and eerie Christmas Eve at the North Pole, where Santa's workshop buzzed with festive cheer. Santa Claus, a jolly man in his red suit and white beard, had just finished inspecting the final batch of presents, ready to be delivered to children all around the world. Mrs. Claus, in her cozy red dress, was bustling about, making sure everything was in order. Unbeknownst to them, deep in the cavernous bowels of the workshop, something sinister was afoot. The mischievous and curious elves, known for their love of sweets, had discovered a stash of candy canes hidden in a dusty corner. These weren't just any candy canes, though. They were cursed candy canes crafted by Krampus, the Christmas demon, himself. As the elves devoured the candy canes, a wicked energy coursed through their veins, turning their cheerful faces into grotesque masks of horror. Their eyes turned bloodshot, their skin gray, and their teeth sharp as icicles. They stumbled out of the shadows, moaning and groaning, craving flesh instead of candy. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the workshop, causing Santa and Mrs. Claus to leap to attention. What they found was a scene straight out of a horror movie. The elves, now zombified and ravenous, had surrounded them. The zombified elves, clad in tattered and blood-stained versions of their traditional festive attire, lumbered towards the couple. Ripped and soiled red and green costumes hung loosely from their emaciated frames, a stark contrast to the joyful attire they usually wore. Their once pointed ears now drooped and were mottled with dark, decaying patches. With terror in their eyes, Santa and Mrs. Claus grabbed whatever makeshift weapons they could find. Santa wielded a wooden nutcracker, its wooden jaw now repurposed to crack open zombie skulls. As the first zombie elf lunged, Santa swung the nutcracker, cracking its head open, candy cane-colored brains splattering onto the workshop floor. Mrs. Claus clutched a candy cane staff adorned with jingle bells. The battle for survive had begun. The elves, no longer Santa's loyal helpers, lunged at the couple with snarling mouths and gnashing teeth. Santa swung his nutcracker, bashing in elf heads with gruesome efficiency. Mrs. Claus impaled the undead elves with her candy cane staff, skewering their brains in a gruesome display of holiday horror. They fought their way through the workshop, leaving a trail of dismembered zombie elves in their wake. The air was thick with the stench of peppermint and the grotesque sight of gingerbread limbs torn asunder. Blood and candy cane fragments painted the walls. As Santa and Mrs. Claus reached the exit of the workshop, they could see the snow-covered landscape beyond. Their reindeer and sleigh awaited, but the path to safety was treacherous. The North Pole was now infested with zombie elves. Determined to make it to the reindeer, Santa and Mrs. Claus improvised even deadlier weapons. They sharpened candy canes into razor-sharp swords, their blades glistening with a deadly sheen of red and white stripes. They moved through the darkness, the only light coming from the eerie glow of the cursed candy canes. The candy cane swords sliced through elf flesh with sickening ease, decapitating and disemboweling the undead horde. Santa and Mrs. Claus, now covered in a gruesome mixture of blood and candy cane splatter, fought their way to the reindeer stables. Inside the stables, the reindeer sensed the danger and snorted in alarm. Santa and Mrs. Claus quickly harnessed them, their candy cane swords at the ready. With a mighty heave, they broke through the stable doors and burst into the freezing night. As they ascended into the sky, the horrifying sight of the North Pole filled their vision. Zombie elves roamed the snowy landscape, their limbs dragging, and their eyes vacant. In the distance, a majestic narwhal with a spiraled horn could be seen skewering zombie elves on its gleaming tusk, adding a surreal touch to the nightmare. Santa and Mrs. Claus soared away from the horror below, the cold wind biting at their faces. The world outside was dark and quiet, and they were finally safe. Mrs. Claus turned to Santa, who still had a wild look in his eyes. As they flew away, they looked down and saw an elf using dental tools to fend off zombies. Another surreal sight unfolded as they spotted an animated snowman and the abominable snowman fighting off zombies back to back. The snowman wielded a carrot as a makeshift weapon, while the abominable snowman swung a large tree limb with brute force. Together, they formed an unlikely but effective team against the horde of zombie elves, adding a bizarre twist to the ongoing nightmare. "That's it, Santa," she said, shaking him gently. "No more warm milk and candy canes after watching Night of the Living Dead for you again. I'll call Krampus to pick up his copy in the morning so you're not tempted to watch it again." Santa blinked and slowly came to his senses. He realized that it was all just a horrific nightmare, brought on by a combination of too much sugar and a scary movie marathon. He let out a nervous laugh, relieved that the North Pole was still a place of joy and wonder, not a land of the undead.